Today, I'm going to share a story that has haunted me for years. It's something that happened to me a few summers ago, and I haven't been able to shake it off. This story isn't just creepy, it's something that fundamentally changed the way I see the world. So, grab a blanket, turn off the lights, and listen closely. It all started when I decided to spend a few weeks at my grandparents' old farmhouse. It was located in a remote part of the countryside, surrounded by dense woods and a lake that always seemed to have a layer of mist hovering over it. The house itself was a relic from the 19th century, creaking and groaning as if it had its own secrets to keep. I arrived on a warm afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that danced eerily on the walls. My grandparents had passed away years ago, and the house had been left to me. I thought it would be a good idea to spend some time there, clear my head, and maybe decide what to do with the property. Little did I know, this visit would be anything but peaceful. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time cleaning, organizing, and exploring the old house. There were rooms I'd never been in, and every corner seemed to hold a piece of history. One evening, I found an old journal hidden in a drawer in the attic. It belonged to my great-grandmother, who had lived in the house during the early 1900s. The journal was filled with mundane entries about daily life, but towards the end, the entries became more erratic and unsettling. July 15, 1923, there's something in the woods. I can feel it watching me. I hear whispers at night, but when I look, there's no one there. July 20, 1923, I saw it today. A shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest. It disappeared when I tried to approach. July 25, 1923, it's getting closer. I hear it calling my name. I'm afraid to go outside after dark. As I read these entries, a chill ran down my spine. My great-grandmother had experienced something terrifying, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was still lurking around the property. I decided to investigate, to see if there was any truth to her words. That night, I set up a few cameras around the house and the edge of the woods. I wanted to catch any movement or strange occurrences. The first few nights, I didn't capture anything unusual, just the usual sounds of nature and the creaks of the old house settling. But on the fourth night, things took a dark turn. I was reviewing the footage when I noticed something strange. In one of the videos, a shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the forest, just as my great-grandmother had described. It was tall and seemed to be watching the house. My heart pounded as I watched it stand there for a few minutes before slowly retreating into the woods. Determined to find out what was going on, I armed myself with a flashlight and headed outside. The night was eerily quiet, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. As I approached the spot where the figure had been, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath fogged up in front of me, and I could hear a faint whispering, like multiple voices speaking at once. I shone my flashlight around, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard my name being called, faint and distant. My blood ran cold. It was the same voice from my great-grandmother's journal. I spun around, and there it was, the shadowy figure, now much closer than before. It was almost as if it had been waiting for me. I stumbled back, tripping over a root and falling to the ground. The figure moved closer, and I could see its eyes, empty and void of any light. It raised an arm, pointing towards the house. Suddenly, the whispering grew louder, filling my ears with an unbearable cacophony of voices. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the house, slamming the door behind me. For the rest of the night, I stayed locked inside, every sound making me jump. I could hear faint knocking at the windows, but I was too terrified to look. When morning finally came, I decided I had to leave. Whatever was haunting this place wasn't something I could face alone. As I packed my things, I found one last entry in my great-grandmother's journal that I had missed before, August 1, 1923, it won't let me leave. Every time I try, it calls me back. I am its prisoner now. I fled the house, vowing never to return. To this day, I don't know what that figure was or why it was haunting my family. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the whispering. And I wonder if, one day, it will come for me too. So, if you ever find yourself in a place that feels off, that makes your skin crawl and your heart race, trust your instincts. Some shadows are better left undisturbed. I have another chilling tale to share with you. It's a story that's been passed down through whispers and hushed conversations in my hometown. A story about a place that many believe is cursed. This is the tale of the Forgotten Orphanage. Back in the early 1900s, there was an orphanage on the outskirts of our town. It was a large, imposing building made of stone, with tall windows and ivy crawling up its walls. The orphanage was run by a strict matron named Mrs. Whitaker, who was known for her harsh discipline and cold demeanor. The children who lived there were often seen working in the fields or tending to the animals, rarely allowed to play or enjoy their childhood. One winter, a terrible fire broke out in the orphanage. The blaze spread quickly, engulfing the building in flames. Despite the efforts of the townspeople, the fire couldn't be contained. Many of the children and staff perished that night, their screams echoing through the cold air. The orphanage was left in ruins, and the townspeople vowed never to speak of it again. They believed the place was cursed, and over time, it was forgotten, left to be reclaimed by nature. Years passed, and the story of the orphanage became a local legend, a ghost story told to scare children. But there were always rumors of strange occurrences around the site. Some claimed to hear the faint sound of children laughing or crying in the dead of night. Others reported seeing ghostly figures wandering the grounds. Despite these tales, few dared to visit the place, until one summer, when a group of friends and I decided to investigate. We were a curious bunch, always looking for a thrill. So, armed with flashlights and cameras, we set off one evening to explore the remains of the orphanage. The sun had just set, casting an orange glow over the landscape. As we approached the site, a sense of unease settled over us. The ruins of the orphanage loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. The front gate was rusted and hanging off its hinges. We pushed it open with a loud creak and stepped inside. The air was heavy, and the silence was almost deafening. We made our way through the overgrown path, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The main building was still standing, though it was crumbling and covered in ivy. Windows were shattered, and the once grand entrance was barely recognizable. As we explored, we came across remnants of the past, old toys, broken furniture, and tattered clothing. It was as if the place had been frozen in time. We decided to split up, each of us taking a different part of the building to cover more ground. I found myself in what used to be the dining hall. The long wooden tables were charred and covered in dust. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and decay. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, but the sound was too soft, too distant. I followed the whisper, my flashlight flickering as I moved deeper into the building. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out the words, "Help us." My heart raced as I turned a corner and found myself in a small, dimly lit room. In the center was a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in grime. I approached the mirror, wiping away the dirt with my sleeve. As I did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Reflected in the mirror were the faces of children, pale, with hollow eyes, staring back at me. I stumbled back, my flashlight falling to the ground. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. Panicking, I turned to leave but found the door had slammed shut. I banged on it, screaming for my friends, but the only response was the ghostly whispers. In a desperate attempt, I picked up my flashlight and smashed it against the mirror. The glass shattered, and for a moment, the whispers stopped. But then, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around to see a young girl standing behind me. Her eyes were filled with sadness, and her clothes were singed and torn. She reached out to me, and I felt a sudden surge of cold. "Please, help us," she whispered. Before I could react, the room began to spin, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was outside the orphanage, my friends standing over me with worried expressions. They said they had heard my screams and found me lying unconscious near the entrance. I told them what I had seen, and we decided to leave immediately. As we made our way back to town, we could still hear the faint whispers carried on the wind. We never spoke of that night again, but I can't forget what I saw and heard. The children of the orphanage are still there, trapped in the ruins of their past, seeking help that will never come. So, if you ever find yourself near the forgotten orphanage, remember this story. Some places are haunted not just by spirits, but by the echoes of their tragic history. And sometimes, the past refuses to let go. Hello again, I'm going to share a story that's even more unsettling than the last. This tale revolves around a place that has been the subject of countless local legends and ghost stories, Blackwood Manor. This story comes from my uncle, who swears it happened to him. So, settle in and prepare yourself for the haunting of Blackwood Manor. Blackwood Manor is an old Victorian mansion located on the outskirts of a small town. Built in the late 1800s, it was once a grand estate owned by the wealthy Blackwood family. However, tragedy struck when the entire family mysteriously disappeared one night, never to be seen again. The manor was abandoned, left to decay over the decades. Locals avoided the place, believing it to be cursed. My uncle, Tom, was a skeptic. He never believed in ghosts or curses. So when he heard about the manor, he saw it as an opportunity for adventure. One autumn evening, he decided to explore the old mansion with his friend Mike. They packed their flashlights, some snacks, and a camera, determined to document their findings. As they approached Blackwood Manor, they were struck by its eerie beauty. The once elegant mansion was now a shadow of its former self. Ivy crawled up the walls, and the windows were dark and broken. The air around the manor was still and heavy, as if time itself had stopped. They pushed open the creaking front gate and made their way up the overgrown path. The front door was slightly ajar, and with a gentle push, it swung open, revealing a grand but decayed foyer. The air inside was musty, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. Every step they took echoed through the empty halls. They started their exploration on the ground floor, moving from room to room. The once opulent living room was filled with broken furniture and torn drapes. In the dining room, a long table was still set with dusty plates and silverware, as if the family had just left in the middle of dinner. It was as if the manor had been frozen in time. As they moved upstairs, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The air felt colder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. They found themselves in a long hallway lined with portraits of the Blackwood family. The eyes of the portraits seemed to follow them, adding to the growing sense of unease. They reached the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was grand, with a large canopy bed and ornate furniture. However, the most striking feature was a large mirror on the wall opposite the bed. My uncle felt drawn to it, and as he approached, he noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror didn't match the room. Instead, it showed the room as it must have looked in its prime, clean, well-lit, and with a woman sitting at the vanity. Tom called Mike over, and they both watched in stunned silence as the woman in the mirror began to move. She turned to look directly at them, her expression one of sadness and desperation. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and the room around them seemed to come alive. The temperature plummeted, and they could hear faint whispers growing louder and louder. Panic set in, and they decided to leave immediately. As they rushed down the hallway, they heard footsteps behind them, as if someone was chasing them. They glanced back and saw shadowy figures emerging from the walls, reaching out towards them. They bolted down the stairs, through the foyer, and out the front door. Breathless and terrified, they didn't stop running until they were far away from the manor. When they finally caught their breath, they realized they had left their camera behind. Too scared to go back, they decided to forget about it and never speak of what they had experienced. A few days later, Tom received a call from Mike. Mike had returned to the manor to retrieve the camera, unable to shake the feeling of unfinished business. When he developed the film, he found a series of disturbing photos. The images showed them exploring the manor, but in the background of each photo, there were ghostly figures, pale, transparent shapes of people who shouldn't have been there. The final photo was the most chilling. It was a picture of Tom standing in front of the mirror in the master bedroom. The reflection in the mirror wasn't his own but that of a man with dark, hollow eyes and a twisted smile, the same man who had been chasing them through the house. After that, they both vowed never to return to Blackwood Manor. The experience left them with a deep sense of dread and a belief that some places truly are haunted. My uncle, once a skeptic, now firmly believes in the supernatural. So, if you ever hear about a place with a dark past, think twice before exploring it. Some stories are better left untold, and some places are better left undisturbed. The spirits of Blackwood Manor still linger, waiting for their next visitors.